Welcome to episode 485 of the Barcelona podcast, brought to you by the Blue Wire Podcast Network. I'm Dan Hilton. He's Domagoj Kostanjšak, and we've got a good one for you today, talking all about Vitor Roque, who I have confirmed, well, the club at least confirmed it, the pronunciation, while my Portuguese is not great, is Vitor Roque, so I'll be 100% from here on out. And because today is mainly Vitor Roque, we'll do a little bit of things at the end, because unfortunately for us, timing-wise, Oriol Romeu might officially be a Barcelona player by the time we're done, and while Domagoj and I would love to go 2 to 3 hours on everything you need to know about everybody that Barcelona's bringing in, and not even those that they're sending out, but anyone they're bringing in over the next 2 years. We will not have enough time for that today. So maybe we'll, again, do a little nuggets at the end and have to do more on that later in the week. Because for now, again, Vitor Roque is the topic here. And there are 3 different ways of categorizing a discussion about an 18-year-old Brazilian player. That is potential. That is the current good of what he is now, why Barcelona signed him for 30 million fixed fee with 26 million euro add-ons, which include 5 million if he finishes the top 3 of the Ballon d'Or. So, I mean, basically, yeah, it's a big contract and big numbers if he earns that contract. And I've said before, in theory, that deal with those 26 million add-ons, really he costs 30 million, because if he is good enough, he will more than make up as a Brazilian number 9. He will more than make up for that contract if he winds up being worth 56 million euros for sure. All indications are that he will arrive next summer, not even in January. So again, today we're going to do the potential, the current good, and then our current concerns. And I think where we start, Domagoj, is with the current stuff that he does well. And you and I just quickly were going over some of the things, and 2 of his, I'd say, qualities that are going to immediately fit into Xavi's system and immediately make sense are pressing and positioning. So have at it, Domagoj. Where do you want to start with our friend Vitor Roque, the 18-year-old, with pressing or positioning? I mean, what is his best attribute even to come over with Xavi?
Well, I would probably start with positioning, and in that positioning, I would also add movement, because that's kind of goes together, right? So positioning as where he starts, but also movement is a big part of what he does, because he is a very mobile, a very versatile forward. So he is a center forward on paper, of course, but he can play on the wings. He can play a bit deeper in the half spaces as well. That's what he normally does, or at least has done so far for his club. And I feel that's something that he can transfer to Barcelona. And having that striker, or just a forward who will attack space, and he will attack space. He is a runner and a carrier, but he can do those off-the-ball runs that I think Xavi in particular will value a lot. And that positioning and movement, I think having a striker who can do that, right, who can consistently do that on a high level, and we're talking about an 18-year-old player who is already this good at one specific thing that we're discussing just now, I feel like that's a big win. Just having someone who can move that well, who can follow up on the passes from the deep, who can attack the space, who can be aggressive, who can pull markers out of their position, who can pin the back line, and also use that pace, use that agility that he has with his low center of gravity to kind of pull the defenses apart. It's a very, very valuable trait to have. And it's one of those things that makes him so dangerous in the box, but also outside the box. Inside the box, he moves like a poacher. He finishes like a poacher, but we'll discuss that later, I guess. But outside the box and just attacking the box from the deep, or even attacking the high line of the defensive, of the opposition's defensive line, this is where Roque will shine. And I think we'll see even more of that, because at the moment, while he is being fed the right balls, he is scoring a lot of goals. I think at Barcelona, if the delivery, distribution, and the assists, the support kind of increases in quality, which it should, I think that we might even see even deadlier, even more effective Vitor Roque, who even at this stage in his career is already being touted as one of the greats, one of the players who is just a menace in the box. And that's what he does, because when he's in and around the box, the penalty area, he's just like a constantly pulled arrow. He will just find those little nooks and crannies, and then when he has an angle, he will just go for it. And that's one of his great attributes, because he is tricky, he is fast, he is strong, and when he makes that little separation with the marker, he just goes for it. And his ball striking is so good that more often than not, when he shoots and when he's comfortable and optimistic that the shot will be worth it, more or less he's on target, and then he will bang in the goals. And I feel like this movement and positioning plays a big part of that. And at Barca, if he can replicate that, and then even kind of increase on it, improve upon it with a better quality around them, well, then we're talking about a special player in that case.
Yeah, I mean, I think that his profile at the moment when it comes to positioning and then mixing them with pressing a little bit really complements Dembele rather well, even more so than Rafinha or Ansu. Or again, we're kind of pinning him in as a center forward, and we'll get to that later, for Robert Lewandowski, and not necessarily playing together, which is something that we can again focus on in a little bit. But what I like about how he might be able to mesh well with Dembele is that when he receives the ball, he likes to go forward rather quickly, which might turn into, let's say, a negative thing if Barcelona would like to have possession and would. I don't want to get into concerns, but if they want to go forward as they do, and Xavi has proven that he does appreciate that about his forwards if they are direct, and he may try to get he may get caught, I should say, trying to force passes forward to other players trying to run in behind. But Xavi has shown that he's willing to live with those turnovers from Dembele and from Rafinha. And as you mentioned, the work with Dembele, I think, with his delivery, that being Dembele's, and Vitor Roque working off of him and making those runs, not only in behind, but tucking in, allowing Dembele to get in behind on the wings. Those are going to be really important sets, we'll say, that I think are going to feel like on the training pitch, ironed out and worked through and worked through and worked through. And so this is one of those things where his positioning in particular might start really poorly in week one or the first few times you see him. But by January, if he's coming over the summer, by January, it's going to look a lot better, which again, you're going to have to be patient on that, those kind of improvements. And I want to say too, that he does operate positionally mainly in the middle, sure, but he'll often start his moves fairly even between the left and the right, shading a bit to the right even. But again, he receives in the middle, but if he's going to, let's say, go at goal himself, it's going to come from the left or the right. And we do see this with a lot of center forwards. I mean, very rarely are there center forwards in world football that aren't going to drift to the wings just a little bit. Like someone who's rather stationary is like a Harry Kane, as opposed to like a Karim Benzema. And Vitor Roque, in terms of his positioning, where he likes to set up, will be a little more like not even 2023 or 2022 Karim Benzema, but like a 2018 Karim Benzema. And that was because Ronaldo, well, I guess I would say 2015 Ronaldo was much more coming into the middle as well. And there was a lot of switching up on that forward line. And then that does bring us to when Barcelona doesn't have the ball, and that's the pressing, which is to me the most impressive thing and why I think he'll get minutes and he'll be okay in Xavi's system. Because I think he does press well, not only for a player that Barcelona is signing, but for his age as well. You can put him, or I could say you could put the more immobile player, and I would use Dembele for this example, because we did see Xavi experiment a little bit with this as Lewandowski came back from the World Cup and wasn't like totally fit. He could use Dembele once Barcelona turns the ball over and they've tried to pin the opposition deep. He can use Dembele in the middle on that press and have Roque pressing out on the right where he's comfortable. And we've seen that his Brazilian club team in Athletic Paranaense does this as well. Has Roque out on the right wing to press and then puts what they're more mobile center forward. And it does depend on whether or not they're playing in a 4-2-3-1 or a 3-4-3. And they have played in different attacking shapes and defensive shapes as well. But one thing, and I will kind of put little concerns in here as we go along as well, he will definitely have to learn how to pace himself pressing wise, because at this point in the Brazilian league, he does go at 100 miles per hour most of the time. And the good thing is, even if he's not affecting a game offensively, which I have watched games where he just, not say pedestrian, but he's not having the impact he would like to, because as you'll talk about in a second, he does get low volume chances. So if his team isn't necessarily finding him, it looks like attacking wise, what is he doing in this game? But very much like Rafinha, you're like, well, he was running quite a bit and he was having an impact on the press and he was trying to make an impact in any way he possibly could with a low volume of distribution to come his way. And so his pressing is going to be really important to how many minutes and how much Xavi can trust him. He's just going to have to learn how to, we'll say, pace himself a bit. We'll talk about playing time later too, but the counter argument to that immediately, Domagoj, is that if he is a super sub or if Lewandowski is eating up 75% of minutes still in a season, I'm not worried. The kid's going to be 19 at the time or turning 20. So have at it. Do it all. Go for it. And speaking of going for it, I think we'll start to talk about his potential a little bit here too. And I'm going to give you carte blanche to go off on his goal scoring, because I think we're seeing variances, and we're also seeing in the year that he's been linked to Barcelona, it seems like he's improved that way. And so that makes it almost impossible to know how much more is he going to improve in the next 6 months to a year as well before he comes to Barcelona.
Yeah, it's very interesting because as you touched upon already, he's very low volume but high threat type of player. So he doesn't really get he shoots. It doesn't shoot that often. So he does attempt shots from outside the box and inside the box, but he's not a volume shooter. I wouldn't say not really in the extremes at least. And he doesn't really get much contact. So the most contact he gets is obviously in the box and the final third, and then in the middle third he's also quite effective, can be effective, but his touches there are also not there's not as many. So he's a player who overall he won't really be that involved, as you mentioned as well. And the same goes for his goal scoring. So he would just be at the right place at the right time and to kind of poach those goals. And that's where also his kind of ambipedal nature, so playing with both feet, kind of comes into play. Because I've seen people mention it that he is very proficient with both feet, and I feel like when it comes to finishing, like pure poaching, that is very true. Because he can, from short range, when he is at the right place at the right time, he can comfortably finish with both feet, and that is something that just opens up a world of angles for him inside the box. You can essentially send the ball from any direction, and he will find a way to kind of readjust his body and then take a shot that, with the right or the left foot, depending on the angle that suits him at that moment. So that's very impressive for an 18-year-old boy, or kid, right? So I feel like having such a presence inside the box is immense, and kind of depending on where he plays. If he's a Lewandowski replacement, I know he kind of is seen that way, but maybe there's potential to do different things with him and then open up different angles for him. But I feel like, and yeah, I was going to touch upon this a bit later, but he is extremely right-footed in certain situations. So putting him in a situation where he can use his right foot more effectively will kind of bolster his goal scoring. So if you can kind of open the angles for him to be facing the goal for his right foot, you will get more out of him. So while I do think that inside the box, he's very versatile and very effective on both feet, outside of it, and when it comes to other aspects of his profile, he is very right foot dependent. So it's very important to utilize him in such a way that will kind of play off of that, right? So more as a strength than as a weakness, because if you put him in situations where he has to use his left foot and he's not comfortable using his left foot, then you probably won't get the best out of him. But I'm digressing a bit.
Well, no, I think bring up. I mean, again, we'll have to mix in concerns here, because I think that is certainly a concern. The way that Barcelona is also constituted and built, and a lot of what you're saying also has to do a lot with A, how Ansu bounces back, and B, how Balde continues to evolve in the final third. Because if you have a player, and it's funny because you're right, he can't score with both feet, but oddly enough, 95% of his goals, I don't know how right this is, but I've seen that 95% of his goals are generally scored with his right foot. Or exactly. From either foot. So it's like, even though you're right, I watch it and it's like, okay, he looks pretty adept with both feet, but it seems like that killer ball that's going to find the back of the net is going to come from the right. That means that your final ball likely is going to come from the left instead of the right? Because he would have to catch that inside, turn his hips completely on the ball to get a right foot on a shot coming in from Dembele from the right. Depending on his positioning too. Like if he's running onto it, right? It could be a through ball in the same third. He runs onto it, finishes with his right foot. That I've seen before. There are some goals, if you watch his compilations and things like that, he scores goals like that. But ideally, if it's a ball coming through the air going across the box, because you do have to do that quite a bit to score in the Liga. I mean, especially in the Champions League, we're not even talking about that. But in the Liga, you've got to go horizontal and cross the ball across the box with those balls. That, again, means it's going to have to come from the left. And in theory, you're also going to have to be strong siding your left, as we saw Barcelona do a bit. And that is kind of the nature of their – I talked about it before. They like to leave Pedri and Dembele a little more wide open on that right to right side. And we'll have to see how Ilkay Gundogan, who today was presented, is going to fit into all of that as well. Because it could be that Pedri now moves over to the left, and that's not a concern at all. Because then Pedri finds a final ball, and we're also talking a year or two down the line, so who knows where Gundogan is there, who knows where Lewandowski is there. Now, talking about his body and his positioning, this is a potential thing too, because he's 18. We don't know what he's going to look like, but what we do know is it seems like he's not going to grow too much more. He's not a tall player. He's an average height. But his goals, including the headers, as you kind of mentioned, have come because of his instinct and positioning. And he's not shy to find the headers, and those numbers are not way lower than other strikers, and even Lewandowski, like his percentages of headers are not lower. And you talked a lot about currently and in the future how his stature could benefit him quite a bit. I mean, and that's why I have other comparisons for him. We'll get into that conversation next, but that's why you're seeing Tevez, Aguero, just because
Yeah.
if you, I mean, it's a squint test. If you squint and look at the body and go, who is that? Is that Tevez? Is that Aguero? No, that's Vitor Roque, just based on how strong his lower body is. And I can't imagine when he turns 19 in 2021, his lower body is going to become weaker. I think that is certainly going to be something he is going to have for a while.
Yeah, absolutely. He has that short, kind of stocky, compact build and very, very developed lower body. So his legs are very powerful, which of course it aids him kind of in this jumping power. This does aid jumping power, but headers are generally they do depend on how well you jump. Of course they do, but it's also about a timing and how you position yourself with the defender. And that's why Koundé, for example, who's also a short player, but he wins all of those headers. And that's what's impressive about Koundé. And also, similarly, Roque is someone who's not very tall, but also can win headers. But I wouldn't really count on him scoring many headers. But at the same time, it is something that he can do if he's in the right position and the right time again, which he can be because he has that instinct to be where he needs to be. So it would be an option, but yeah, I wouldn't really count on it. But yeah, his body it does invite comparisons with Tevez and Aguero because they were both kind of shorter and more powerful, explosive in tight spaces, and he is explosive in tight spaces as well. Compact, stocky build, strong. So it will be interesting to see, and it also affects how he runs because his legs are a bit shorter, but he runs in big strides when he's off the ball, and then he runs in smaller strides when he has the ball at his feet, which is important because his low center of gravity kind of allows him to do those stutter steps, the little steps before he enters the dribbling. So that gives him kind of an edge. Those small steps kind of invite the marker to come in and try to tackle the ball. And then he has the low center of gravity and agility to kind of move out of the way and change directions quickly. So he has that. His physique kind of allows him to be more effective in dribbling, which also means that when he's out wide or in space, he can be an effective 1-versus-1 player. Although his dribbling is not that smooth, he's not really a flashy dribbler. Sometimes he does try those Brazilian, flair moves, but he's not really a flair player, in nature. So I feel like he can still be an effective player out wide and in open space when he faces just one opponent. It's not his strong side, but he has space to attack behind the marker. That's very effective for him as well because, as I said, he runs in big strides, which allows kind of the foot to kind of be firmer on the ground, make better contact with the ground, which makes him more difficult to kind of shrug off the ball. And his strength, the lower body strength, kind of enables him to be that more stable, more kind of immovable object, right? So I feel like those purely physical attributes kind of give him a good foundation for the future as well, because those players, if they have certain strengths, right? So he has both the physical strength, agility, and speed, and low center of gravity, and all that combined can kind of turn him into a very, very tricky player to mark, which will come in handy because in La Liga, I don't think he'll get the space that he gets now. So
Right.
it will be very, very important for him to be more kind of trickier, more evasive, and to scan a bit more because he needs to be aware of his surroundings. And then if he can kind of turn into space properly, if he can kind of wiggle his way out of the tight spots, that will do him a world of good, I feel.
Well, yeah, we talked even about the headers, and we talk about that through the lens of scoring goals with your head.
Mm.
But in truth, his aerial abilities are going to be most important in hold up play. It's going to be, can you win those 50-50s to knock it back to an on rushing midfielder? Because that's how you get out on a counter attack. And even in the air, even if you're not using your head, are you using your body, your torso? And how or what is your ability, especially with your lower body, to be able to receive in traffic, hold that ball up for the second or two that's going to be required. And those little things on how quickly he can figure out how to receive, turn, how quickly he can win those duels in the air, and if he's ever going to do that. Because again, that is where the headers and his size are kind of frustrating. Because yeah, if you have a center forward that's 6'5", even though they're not going to be as mobile, like look at how many second balls, and there's a good reason and a correlation why Barcelona had a bunch of comebacks with Luuk de Jong as their number 9. As crazy as that sounds, like that's how we think of that, because it's not even about, it's huge to win that final ball and score that final goal, because if you don't score it, nobody remembers it. But because with Luuk de Jong, Barcelona were scoring some of those goals, now I do go back and remember how Luuk de Jong won the ball before the one that got Barcelona in that middle part of the field into their attack on the counter and out and moving. All right, talking a little more about comparisons too, because because he's an FC Barcelona player, he will be compared to other Brazilian greats from the past, like Romario, Rivaldo, Ronaldo, that being R9, Ronaldinho, Neymar. And it's odd because there are 47 Brazilians who played for Barcelona, and until he proves otherwise, well, also the price tag at 30 million euros, that's a big number. And so big numbers mean big players. And so he's going to be compared to the big players. But I've said before, and it was my first instinct, and I stick with that, what my gut said. To me, he looks like an early Luis Suarez. And now we're talking 15, 16, 17 years ago. But the first time I saw Luis Suarez was at Ajax when he was around 20, 21 years old. And that's the Ajax version of Luis Suarez, who he looks like now, right? That's before he moved to Liverpool and before he put up huge numbers, then moved to Barcelona and put up insanely huge numbers. And these comparisons, I'm talking about all the different Brazilians and Luis Suarez, they're unfair based on a potential ceiling, of course, but I think they're important to discuss what he could be if he improves on the skills he already has at 18. And we can use these comparisons to figure out what he does well and where he does it from. And that's why, again, I keep going back to Luis Suarez stuff, and you compare him not to the player that he was and the legend that we know him to be, but the player and the tools you saw early on. Because even Luis Suarez, 10 goals in 27 appearances for Nacional before moving to Groningen, then Ajax at the age of 19. Right now, Vitor Roque has scored the most non-penalty goals, that being 8 in the Brazilian league this season in 14 matches, as their season starts in April. He also has 2 assists. But he's also gone on a 5-game scoring run. He also was the top goal scorer with 6 at the U20 South American, the South American CONMEBOL competition. And so he's scoring goals, even though I don't profile him right now as like this pure goal scorer. Like I'm talking about those youth players that really just crush it. Like Ronaldo, that being R9. He was at Cruzeiro before PSV, scored 34 in 34, was just absolutely cannot miss. And it's a different time. Again, this is a Brazilian league in the mid-90s. Different time, sure. But he was just banging them in. And there are those kids that are just, okay, they're putting up huge numbers. It's going to be translatable in some way when those numbers go down. But I've never felt like he was, and he didn't at a youth level. Like you go back and you ask, like he was a part of the Cruzeiro youth system prior to making the move to Atletico Paranaense for 4 million euros, which is a ton of money for them to bring him in last year. So it's not like he came up through their academy. He was part of other academies. He kind of bounced around a little bit, and he didn't really profile as like some crazy great goal scorer, but he did profile as, okay, this kid is special. And that is the thing about Jogo Bonito, that you see it. You see like these Brazilian kids, and you're like, that kid has got it. What is it? I don't know, but it's the thing that Brazilian kids have, and you trust it at the time. Because even trying to compare him to others too, Rivaldo was a Palmeiras professional before moving to Deportivo La Coruña, then before moving on to Barcelona. So you're talking about a player in a different phase of his career. So I'm not saying we can throw those comparisons out the window, but it's a bit unfair. Same thing with, again, Luis Suarez. It's going to be unfair because he already was almost a Ballon d'Or candidate with Liverpool. And then even Romario was in his mid-20s when he moved to Barcelona from PSV after a few years there. He also played a few years as a pro with Vasco da Gama before that. So again, as quickly as we're going to say there are comparisons to other Brazilians, there aren't really. Like Neymar coming from Santos is kind of the guy, right? It was a huge number. And the good thing for Vitor Roque is because of Endrick and because of Vinny Jr. and Rodrigo still being rather young, Neymar was the guy. I take you back 10, 11, 12 years. Like Neymar at 17 was the Brazilian superstar. Can't miss. Cristiano Ronaldo, Messi, Neymar. It was going to be in that order. That was what was going to happen. And he's not at that level of hype, which is great. I really like that. And that gives me hope that he functionally will be much. Because again, Neymar was going to come in with the Superman cape, give the kid the ball, let him do his thing. That's how special Neymar was. Vitor Roque is not that special of a player, but he has all these skills that, again, if refined, he could be a really, really, really good, important professional for anybody, regardless of Brazilian or Uruguayan or whatever. But he has that technical ability, sure. And I think this brings up some of the concerns here. Because some of my concerns are not only that step up in technical ability, because he has it in the Brazilian league, and I don't know if it's learned, but as I said, like it's not that like Brazilian Neymar like right away, like you see it and you know it, but he does definitely have like superior technical ability, and he'll be just fine in the Liga. But will he be just fine at the highest levels of what Barcelona expect him to be in Champions League European competition? Those are two different answers. And then you said his dribbling was something in 1v1 situations you trust. I actually want to push back a little bit on that. I think that is probably his weakness and what would limit his minutes on the wings, because concerns are also how much playing time he's going to get behind Lewandowski, and who knows when his drop off is going to be. So if he's going to get minutes and Xavi continues to not trust that left wing and has a whole year to try to push out Ansu and Ferran Torres, that means there's going to be a glaring hole in the left wing next year for Vitor Roque to show up and get. But if he only has 46% of his dribbles currently being productive, which is less than Dembele, way less, and less than Rafinha, way less, then I don't see how you can put him in 1v1 situations and trust that dribbling ability. And then my question for you, Domagoj, is not to say you have to validate my concern and make my feelings, you know what I mean? You could hurt my feelings in this way. But if he does not refine that skill in his dribbling, will that limit his minutes? Will that actually hold him back if Xavi cannot trust him on the wing in 1v1 situations to give him minutes?
Yes, I think it could. But the thing about his dribbling, as I said, I think it's okay. It can be efficient. It's not his best attribute. Far from his best attribute, I would agree with that one. It can be good. It's not smooth. It's not flashy. It's not really anything extraordinary, but it can work. It can work in certain situations, and I feel only if you give him space to run into. He's similar to Balde in that way. Balde needs space behind the opposition's back line or behind his marker to kind of run past him and attack that space either with the ball or without the ball. It's more often with the ball, but Roque is kind of different in a way that he can attack it without the ball. So as a left winger, this was my kind of my idea, my proposition for Roque was to get more minutes on the left wing in case Ansu or Ferran don't start performing at the level that Barca would need him to perform, is put Roque in that left winger position, because in theory that position would require lower volume of passing, and just put him in not a creative role, so not a role that would require him to be a constant one versus one threat, so a dribbler or a creator. Just make him into a pure goal scoring attacker of space role. So that was my idea. Just put him out there, ping those diagonal balls from right to left. You have Koundé on the side or Dembele on the right side, who will just kind of feed balls into Roque, and he would attack space behind the opposition's line. But he needs that space to be effective with his dribbling. If he's in tight spaces and he needs to somehow do some sort of a fancy move to get out of there, I don't see him being as effective of a dribbler as, for example, Dembele or Rafinha are. So in that regard, absolutely, his dribbling is not where it should be for a one versus one winger or isolated winger on out wide, but he's more of an inverted kind of attacking the box type of player, who will, the higher he is, the more closer to the box he is, he'll be more effective. But he can start wide, he can start behind the opposition's line, or rather in front of the opposition's line, and then attack that space, attack the balls behind them, and that's where his qualities will kind of shine in that position. And also his right foot, because he is so predominantly right-footed when he carries the ball, when he controls the ball, when he passes the ball, even when he shoots the ball, coming in from the left side and cutting inside towards his right foot opens up the angles much better for him. And I feel like if you put him in that position, you kind of create the platform for him to succeed in front of goal, but also give him those situations where he can rely on his right foot more on his left than his left foot, because his right foot on the right side kind of takes him too far out wide. And since he's not really a passer of a ball, not really a proficient one or creative one, and that on the right side you turn him into a more of a creator role, which takes him far away from the goal, from the box. So that's not an option. But on the left side, his right foot kind of takes him closer to the box, opens the angles for him to shoot on his right foot, open his body and shoot towards the goal, and attack that space off the ball as well. So I feel like, yes, dribbling would kind of limit what he can do. He wouldn't be as versatile as a Dembele, for example. But if you limit his role to attacking the space and getting as close to the goal as possible, and then just being a goal scorer in that position, I feel like he could thrive there, and he could get more minutes in case Ansu Fati doesn't really, shine next season, or Ferran Torres doesn't shine next season. But of course, since Roque is probably joining the year after,
Right.
that begs the question: is Lewandowski still going to be our number one striker in that season? Because he's going to be, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of it's not even Lewandowski too. Like, there's so many questions there. With is Rafinha now in year 2 going to be still around next summer? Right? Is there going to be room on the right wing? What is Dembele's health going to be even a year from now? Will Ansu come back? And you're talking about like percentages, right? And in a perfect world, to be honest, like in a perfect world, Lewandowski turns 35 in August, so like about a month, right? So next year is his 35-year season. Then he turns next August before Vitor Roque while he's in preseason training, and just as the season begins, Lewandowski turns 36, which I said before, physically not the same, but we saw a little bit of an injury in the drop off after the World Cup. At 36 for Lewandowski, very much like Jordi Alba Balde, which I can now say, we look at this past season, we say there now is a perfect scenario. Now, Jordi Alba's contract be damned in this conversation, but there is a perfect situation as to Balde's timeline and Alba's timeline and just how lucky Barcelona got with that. And there is, I mean, what percentage are you going to throw it at? 5 to 8%. That Lewandowski's timeline and Vitor Roque's timeline fit perfectly. Lewandowski gives you one more year being the guy. And I think even last year for Real Madrid, if Benzema had an understudy like a Vitor Roque, like if Endrick had been 3 years older and you had 19-year-old Endrick last year behind Benzema, I think there is a world where Real Madrid, with that combination, maybe win the Liga, like because they just have goals all the time, where they need them to come from, and things like that. And in the case of Lewandowski, how much and when is that drop off coming? Because again, he will be around because of his contract being 3 more years. He will be around, I promise, for that drop off. Barcelona are very much like Luis Suarez, going to see some of that regression while he is under contract, making big money. So Vitor Roque, the way his contract is probably going to be built with a huge release clause, all those things, they're going to be incentivized for him to get better. And then that next contract extension that he signs, that being Vitor Roque, will likely take the salary that Lewandowski in 3 years' time will come off the books with. Again, these are all very optimistic, positive stuff that does not happen in world football. But again, based on the timelines, we talk about timelines a lot too, because I think the example of Endrick being 2 years younger than, or a year and a half younger than Vitor Roque, he might have been too young and not necessarily fit Barcelona's timeline either. Because if Lewandowski falls off, now you've got these 2 years of stopgaps and things like that. And again, we talk about Busquets, that continued to be the Busquets problem, where regardless of who that next guy is, he never came, or he came too early and was frozen out by Busquets, or he came too late and Busquets is gone and then the replacement never came. So it doesn't always work at every position, but there again is a perfect world where Vitor Roque is turning 21, is ready to go with European football and ready to go at the top level, and Lewandowski is kind of already starting to be phased out. So you can basically 50-50 their minutes. And who is the top striker? There doesn't necessarily need to be one. And you have Lewandowski to start in some big games. You have Vitor Roque to start in big games, and Xavi can make those choices. The irony would be, though, that they're so radically different in who they will be at that point in 2 years or in a year's time that it's like, how do you are you setting up your system around your number 9? Because those two are going to profile so differently. And you'd think, I mean, at least you and I think this way, you'd think that one will certainly suit that system better in a year from now than the other one will. So wouldn't the one that fits the system better be the starter? But maybe not, because Lewandowski still has a name cachet of Lewandowski. So, all right, Domagoj, I'm going to give you the final word on Vitor Roque. How do you grade the potential? How do you grade the current player that he is? And how big are the concerns that you actually have?
The current player has value. He has certain value that this Barcelona team in particular can use, especially this more vertical Barcelona that Xavi's Barca still are. And I feel like Roque would kind of fit that heavy metal transition-based football, because he is at the moment, I wouldn't really say he's purely a transition monster or a transition player, but he is a player who's more suited to having more space to attack, who is more suited to being always in motion, always in high gear, always attacking, always going forward, and having as minimal contact with the ball as possible. Not that he doesn't want the ball, but if he keeps him on the low numbers of touches, that kind of suits his game a bit better at the moment, especially in La Liga, where he might be found out soon by the defenders, how to mark him, how to kind of be on his back all the time, and not give him the space to turn into, and not give him the space to run into. So that's kind of the big thing, because how is he going to operate against deep blocks, against pinned oppositions? So that's why I saw this left inverted winger type of role kind of more suited than the number 9 role, because it's has more space to exploit than the central role. It has kind of lower volume of passing and touches than the central role, because ideally Barca would have a number 9 who is quite active and quite involved. Lewandowski has been, but also this hasn't really been his strength. I think we've seen him kind of shaky in those situations, at least towards the end of the season, and when he started dipping in form. I think link-up play and build-up kind of became one of his worst attributes, I would say, with Lewandowski, even though generally you can say that he is the type of player that can do that and does do it quite well. So I feel like moving Roque away from that role as well is beneficial for his development, because if he comes in and he struggles at number 9 and he doesn't get the space, he doesn't have the role that he needs, and he doesn't get the supply that he needs, it doesn't really create the ideal foundation for him to grow. But at the same time, if Barca get their build-up play, the middle of the pitch in order, so if you have this box midfield that will kind of guarantee the build-up play is smooth, then the impact or the involvement of the number 9 kind of is less than it needs to be. So number 9 doesn't have to be as involved if the rest of the pitch, kind of the middle part of the pitch, does the job for him. So he can be more of a low touch, high threat type of profile that Roque can be. So to kind of conclude, I feel like he has a way to go. He has certain flaws that people kind of glance over because he is a big talent, and of course we are all excited about seeing him in a Barca shirt, but I wouldn't really expect him to come in and immediately be this world beater that people want him to be. So I'm not saying he's going to flop, but I'm saying that he will have, it will be a tough time to kind of adjust to all of that, and depending on the role that he gets, and depending on the team that he gets to play with, that's also big. But overall, it's a good signing. It's a signing for the future, and I'm very happy that we managed to get this one over the line. And I'm happy that he is a Blaugrana, and we'll see where we go from there.
Yeah, I think this one is so difficult to assess because of all those concerns and all of what history tells us. Because what we're seeing and what you and I have talked about in the player that he is and the player that he could be fits Xavi's Barcelona. It fits the players around him. Even his age fits generally the timeline of what could be this superstar team. And what I talked about last week with Diego about how Barcelona would love to have a marketable, like, big attacker up top. And if it's not Ansu Fati, for them to say, hey, that's our guy, that is our attacker, that is the focus of these marketing campaigns, all this stuff, this superstar player. And if you're a Brazilian goal scorer, you can be that superstar player. And I don't want to put all that on his shoulders, but again, potential, ceiling, those are the words we can use to talk about what he could be. Now, the other things historically that are concerning is that it's really difficult to be a 20-year-old, a 21-year-old Brazilian. Well, no, he's 18 now, so he'll be 20 when he arrives, or 19 when he arrives. So to be a late teens, early 20s Brazilian, it doesn't usually happen for you in that first move over to Europe. It doesn't. It's really hard, not only culturally, sure, and he probably has good people around him to keep him on the straight and narrow. Not every, you can ask for Mario, not every Brazilian was on the straight and narrow. And when it was came to their Barcelona time, even though that's off the field, because on the field, Mario was awesome and always a great citizen on the field, but off the field, he had his reputation. Ronaldinho the same way. We know it. Rivaldo the same way, sure. But that said, for Vitor Roque, again, the concern is that he may not get the time. He may not be able to, not even him personally, handle the expectations, but Xavi may not be able to give him the playing time he needs in the Champions League and in those big moments to have him be the big player for Barcelona. And I could see a world where, because of all the things that you and I talked about of what he can do, his skill set now and his skill set in the future, that you're talking about a superstar, but a superstar not for FC Barcelona. That is my concern. My concern is that he is like Odegaard, where he's not what Real Madrid needed. They didn't have time. They didn't have room. He wasn't what they needed at the moment because he was 15 or 16 and 17 and 18 years old. and then he winds up being a star at Arsenal. And I think Vitor Roque, there is a world where he's a star and a superstar, not at FC Barcelona. Because again, that move right to Barcelona is really, really tricky because they're trying to win the Champions League. Even if they don't have the talent to, they're going to expect that he is going to be a talent that's going to help them do that. And if he isn't that right out of the gate, it's hard to give him minutes, and then it throws everything out of whack. And a lot changes very quickly, unfortunately, especially for these young players. Ask Ansu Fati. So I think that pretty much surmises what I feel about all young players. Like, it is a risk everywhere all the time. You never know. And at 30 million euros, it is definitely a risk, sure. But I do think he's going to be, with all of what he is, a star somewhere, someday. So that's it. And then, all right, last few things here. Pablo Torre is going on loan to Girona as part of the 4.5 mil plus the loan of Pablo Torre for Oriol Romeu. Again, Domagoj and I could go another hour if we talked about Oriol Romeu at Barcelona this season, but we will have plenty of time to do that because just kind of doing the Pablo Torre thing to Girona and the Girona side of this, Angel Herrera can play there, but he isn't the same player in any way as Oriol Romeu. And Alex Garcia is not the same player either. And it suits Girona to give both of those two players more freedom the way that Barcelona does for Gabi and Frankie de Jong. Kind of saying that Angel Herrera does do a bit of a Gabi impression, and Alex Garcia does do a bit of a Frankie de Jong impression. And Oriol Romeu was the pivot. He was the guy that kept all of it together for those two players. So unless Girona has a pivot up their sleeve somewhere, they really structurally and systemically could suffer this season. And Pablo Torre doesn't fix that for him. But again, kind of comparing too, because Girona did play very similarly to Barcelona, or the way that Xavi wants to play. Like, Girona was one of those sides who wanted to attack and use the ball and was a fun side to watch. So Pablo Torre could be Pedri for Girona. And as I said, they already have a Frankie de Jong and Alex Garcia. They already have a Gabi and Angel Herrera, rather. So will they find a pivot quick enough? I don't know about that.
I don't know either. It's a good question, but the most important thing is that we're getting a pivot. We're getting a pivot that I feel like will at least can surprise a lot of people. I feel like the expectations are low, which is good, which is always good for a Barca signing, and it doesn't happen often. But I feel like those kind of signings, now that Barca are broke, I feel like it really makes you focus. It really makes you look deep into the profiles and the utility of those players. Not the names that you're not chasing names, you're chasing profiles, you're chasing players that actually fit the system. And I feel like Romeu, if he can do the simple things, which he can do, he will be a success. And that's the most important thing. All he has to do is retain and recycle, and that's it. And he can do that at a high level. And I feel like he has some underrated skills, underrated attributes and traits that will surprise people, that can surprise people, and it can surpass our expectations. And I feel like at this moment, for what he currently is, I feel like he fits this system quite well because he will be the horizontal presence next to our more adventurous and vertical players. And that's what we need. We need someone who's going to be tidy and clean and safe in possession, and who's going to be kind of the foundation on which you build someone who enables other players. And if he can do that, and I feel like he can do that, he will be a success. Even though he won't be flashy, he won't be in the spotlight, people won't really get on the edge of their seats because of him. But that's the point of this role that he has. That Busquets was the same. I mean, this player, Romeu, is not Busquets. He's not there to fill Busquets' shoes. He's just, he's a band-aid for a Busquets-sized wound that Barca have. But it will last us. And I feel like it will give us some time to properly scout and identify who that player will be in the future. But for now, I feel like many people are not expecting Romeu to be a success, and that's a good thing. And I feel like that's one of the reasons why he can and hopefully will surprise us. So,
well, I think from a numbers game, this could be a good business move because 4.5 mil, he might very fairly exceed that number, right? It's not a 60 million or 70 million euro pivot for the next 6 to 10 years. It is a stopgap. And at 4.5, plus what again could be a successful move for Pablo Torre, which if Pablo Torre does figure it out at Girona and it works out for him, like even if they wind up selling him in the future, like that'll be a good move for him. And I do like this loan on paper. Then some other little musings around here. Mikel Faye stood out in training, and Xavi has seemingly had some praise for him, but we're not going too crazy about that. However, it's one of those things where if he's coming on the preseason tour, having just signed, coming Literally coming over from his local side in Africa. If he has already hit the ground running to that level and that degree, that Xavi likes him enough to bring him on the preseason tour instead of sending him back to Barca Athletic, that does say something, I think, right? It's like, it's one thing for the media or whatever to say Lamine Yamal and Faye are really impressing Xavi, and then they go and play Barca Athletic or something and not come on the tour. But if he brings him on the tour, like, that says something. It's the same with the Vissel Kobe friendly, where it's like, don't overrate those kids, but also there's a reason why he picked those five, right? And you can kind of keep both of those things in your head. And as I already talked about Pau Kubarsi last week, about he's 2 years younger than Faye, by the way, and just extended his contract. Barcelona do have some really high level potential center backs now if Faye is really like the real deal someday in the future. Now, the other fringe stuff that affect the first team a bit more, Joan Araujo, who just finished up winning the Gold Cup with Mexico, so he has not been in preseason training. And as much as he's excited to have a trophy, that might actually hurt him, because if he was going to impress Xavi, he's not going to have the opportunity to do so because they have got to head out on this preseason tour. So it looks like he's probably going to Las Palmas on loan. It seems like Garcia Pimienta does like certain players and profiles them in a similar way. Las Palmas is, the way they played in Segunda Division is going to be similar to the way Girona are playing now. I think there's going to be comparisons between those two clubs. And then Nico Gonzalez looks like he's going to be going out on loan to Porto, most likely, who I've heard are going to be willing to pay something for that loan. It's not just a loan with his salary being paid for. It's actually like they're going to pay 2 to 3 million for that loan, which is pretty big. And the reason why I think Nico already knows that he's going on loan is that Frank Kessie will travel with the team for the U.S. tour, which does tell me that no deal was done for Saudi Arabia and no deal was done for 30 to 40 million, which is what Barca is probably asking for that asset. So I think Barca is willing to just eat having Kessie around for another year. You know what he gives you. And then in the case of Nico, you know that, well, if Kessie is around and we're not going to get him out of here, then Nico, it's you, because it's a lot easier to send Nico at 21 or 22 out on loan than it is to find someone to pay 30 to 40 million euros for Kessie at this moment.
Yeah, true. And it's a shame with Kessie because I feel like there's a player there that Barca could have used. Well, it's not that he hasn't been useful at all, but I feel like we haven't really seen the player that we wanted to see. On paper, he's someone who should have brought something different, something more aggressive, something more box to box, someone who's closer to the box even and gives you that attacking edge, something that Gundogan will actually hopefully show us in full light. So I don't know, it's a shame. I feel like Kessie could be someone who's going to give you some profit. The market's still open, obviously, just opened, so everything's still possible. But yeah, for Nico, I feel like as much as I would love for him to stay and kind of get minutes at Barca, because there's no better place than Barca to learn how to play as a Barca player. I mean, it sounds obvious, but it is what it is. I mean, but if he can go somewhere and get minutes and continue developing, then I'm fine with that. And if it's a loan deal that gives us some money and they cover his wages, that I guess it's a win. I will take it. And then if you have Oriol Romeu and Kessie, it's a stacked midfield, and then you have Bernardo Silva, who's apparently a proper target for Barcelona, right? as funny as that sounds, but yeah.
Funny.
Yeah, we'll see. Yeah,
they can
we'll see.
They're allowed to call Erling Haaland and leave a voicemail. Like, they're allowed to do that. Like, there's not nothing against that, ruling against them leaving a voicemail somewhere. But I think it's going to go straight to voicemail. But anyway, if you were kind of paying attention during this show and not all the way, down in the show notes below is linked to the Vitor Roque article that Domagoj wrote on his Substack. So check that out, read it, reread it. It may make more sense than us stammering through this. But if you're with us, thanks so much for listening. You know where to find him, again, down in the show notes below, or the Barcelona Pod everywhere, Twitter, Instagram, even Patreon. Just type in the Barcelona Podcast in Google, on the Google machine, and you'll find us everywhere, except the store, which I always forget. The new season, I'm hoping to get 1 or 2 things for the new season into the store on Teespring, so we'll have that link down in the show notes below as well. And then again, YouTube content, all that stuff coming out for the rest of this summer as we get ready for the preseason tour, which basically starts in 6 days. They have their first match against Juventus. So yeah, already matches looking forward to. I can't believe it's already starting again. They don't give us any time, Domagoj, to settle in, figure anything out. And I only got 2 history stuff out this summer. That's how quickly it goes by. But thanks so much for listening to the show. Until next time, we'll talk to you soon. For Sports.